For 18 years, Metal Gear Solid 4 has been trapped, not forgotten, not some obscure spin-off Konami quietly buried and hoped no one would ask about, actually trapped on one very specific, very strange piece of hardware. Metal Gear Solid escaped the original PlayStation, Sons of Liberty escaped the PlayStation 2, Snake Eater has been remastered, re-released, collected and eventually completely remade, even Peace Walker escaped the PSP years ago, but Guns of the Patriots, if you wanted to experience the end of Solid Snake's story, there was only one answer: find a PlayStation 3, and that's slightly ridiculous when you remember what Metal Gear Solid 4 actually was. This wasn't some forgotten curiosity, this was one of the biggest games on the PS3, a technical showcase, a critical darling, and the conclusion to one of gaming's most famous stories. Then the PlayStation 3 generation ended, the PlayStation 4 came and went, the PlayStation 5 arrived, Metal Gear itself disappeared for years and eventually came back, and somehow Metal Gear Solid 4 was still on the PlayStation 3, but on August 27, 2026, the prison door finally opens. Metal Gear Solid 4 is returning in Master Collection Volume 2, so how did a game this important spend 18 years stuck on one console, and why has it taken so long to get Old Snake out? When Metal Gear Solid 4 launched in June 2008, it wasn't merely another PlayStation 3 game, it was an event, and Sony could certainly use one. The PlayStation 3 had endured a difficult beginning, it launched at a high price, Microsoft's Xbox 360 had already been on the market for a year, and developers were still trying to work out what to do with Sony's strange new hardware. The PS3 had something to prove, then Old Snake arrived. Metal Gear Solid 4 looked expensive, it sounded expensive, it was enormous, cinematic, and determined to tie together decades of increasingly messy Metal Gear history, sometimes by giving you a video game, sometimes by putting the controller down and letting two people explain nanomachines to you for the next geological era. It was Metal Gear. The game travelled through huge battlefields, featured extraordinary character models for 2008, and pushed cinematic presentation further than almost anything else on the console. It was also one of the first major demonstrations of what Blu-ray could mean for games. Metal Gear Solid 4 shipped on a dual-layer Blu-ray disc, giving Konami Productions far more storage than a standard Xbox 360 DVD, and audiences responded. Reviews were exceptional, sales were huge, PS3 hardware sales jumped around its release. For plenty of people, Metal Gear Solid 4 wasn't simply a game they happened to own on a PlayStation 3, it was the reason to own a PlayStation 3, which makes what happened afterwards so strange, because as the rest of Metal Gear slowly spread across different platforms, Metal Gear Solid 4 stayed exactly where it was, built for a very strange machine. The obvious explanation was the PlayStation 3 itself, because the PlayStation 3 was weird, powerful, impressive, but weird. At the centre of the console was Sony's Cell processor, and without turning this into a 40-minute lecture about computer architecture, the important part is that developers couldn't simply treat the PlayStation 3 like every other machine. Getting the best out of it meant needing to work around its unusual design. Studios eventually achieved incredible results. Games like Uncharted, The Last of Us and Metal Gear Solid 4 showed exactly what the machine could do, but those results came from developers becoming extremely good at working specifically with the PlayStation 3, and Metal Gear Solid 4 was born right in the middle of that era. It was designed around Sony's machine, optimised around Sony's machine, stored on Sony's Blu-ray format. Even its original installation system felt aggressively PS3. Between acts, Old Snake would appear on screen smoking while the game stored more data onto your hard drive. Snake smoked, you waited, your lungs were probably in better condition afterwards. All of this eventually created a legend around MGS4. The game was simply too PS3 to exist anywhere else, except apparently it wasn't. Years later, former Kojima Productions producer Ryan Payton revealed that the studio had Metal Gear Solid 4 running on Xbox 360 development hardware, and it reportedly ran well. So the Xbox itself wasn't the impossible barrier people sometimes assumed. The bigger headache was storage. Xbox 360 games used DVDs. Metal Gear Solid 4 was sitting on a dual-layer Blu-ray disc. A commercial Xbox release would have required multiple discs and created an entirely different production problem, so it didn't happen. That's an important distinction. MGS4 wasn't magically wielded to a PlayStation 3 motherboard. It could leave. The question was whether moving it somewhere else was worth the work, and once the PlayStation 3 generation ended, that question became more complicated. Now you're dealing with a massive game built around old hardware and old software, carrying years of technical baggage. Could Konami port it? Of course, we're about to play the result, but somebody had to actually decide it was worth doing. For a very long time, nobody did. And that's where the situation started becoming genuinely bizarre, because everybody else escaped. Metal Gear Solid returned through collections and digital releases. Sons of Liberty and Snake Eater received HD versions. Peace Walker moved from the PSP onto home consoles. Even the original MSX Metal Gear game survived. Then the PS3 itself was replaced. The PlayStation 4 arrived in 2013. No MGS4. The entire PS4 generation passed. Still no MGS4. Metal Gear Solid 5 arrived. Kojima left Konami. Metal Gear effectively went quiet. Sony released the PlayStation 5, and there was old Snake still sitting there on the PS3.
Let's try another doctor. It won't make any difference.
Then things finally started moving again. Kojima released Master Collections Volume 1 in 2023, Metal Gear Solid, Sons of Liberty, Snake Eater, the old MSX games, all available on modern hardware. Snake Eater then went one step further and received a complete remake with Metal Gear Solid Delta. Meanwhile, the actual ending of Solid Snake's story remained standard. It became this strange hole in the series. You could easily play Snake's beginning, you could play Big Boss's beginning, you could play the games leading towards Metal Gear Solid 4, you could even buy a modern remake of a game released 4 years before it. But if you wanted to see how Solid Snake's story actually ended, I hope you remember which cupboard you put the PS3 in. Old Snake had survived war, clones, patriots, nanomachines, and a microwave corridor. Apparently, backwards compatibility was the real final boss.
We did it!
Of course, the community didn't simply wait around. PS3 emulation improved dramatically. Projects such as RPCS3 eventually made Metal Gear Solid 4 playable on PC, and powerful modern hardware could push the game far beyond the limits of the original console. That's an extraordinary preservation achievement, but emulation and an official release aren't quite the same thing. Emulation requires some technical knowledge, it requires suitable hardware, and depending on the game, it can require the willingness to spend an evening wondering why something worked perfectly for a bloke on Reddit, but absolutely refuses to work for you. An official port removes that barrier. You buy it, you install it, you play it, and that's increasingly important as old hardware ages. PlayStation 3 consoles aren't immortal. Hard drives fail, disk drives fail, controllers die, cables disappear. Eventually, your collection of old hardware begins to look less like a gaming setup, more like you're operating an electronics museum. Metal Gear Solid 4 demonstrated a strange problem with modern game preservation. It wasn't rare, millions of copies existed, you could buy one cheaply, but the only machine officially able to play it was getting older every year. The game wasn't disappearing, access to it was.
I have no future. This is just as I'd hoped things would end. This is my fight. My destiny.
I cannot imagine that's what the boss would have wanted.
Liquid Snake!
Zero and Big Boss. They both misinterpreted her will.
You're pretty good. The world would be better off without snakes.
And now finally, we reach 2026. Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2 launches on August 27, and this time, Old Snake has come on with it. Metal Gear Solid 4 is officially leaving the PlayStation 3 for the first time since 2008. The collection brings it to the modern platforms alongside the HD version of Peace Walker, with Ghost Babel included as bonus content. There are also screenplay books, master books, the Metal Gear Solid 4 database and other extras. And if you only want Guns of the Patriot, Konami is offering Metal Gear Solid 4 separately as digital release. All of that is nice, but the most important thing is much simpler. Metal Gear Solid 4 is becoming a normal video game again, not a PlayStation 3 game you need to keep old hardware alive for, not something you need to emulate, not the awkward missing chapter in Metal Gear's history, just Metal Gear Solid 4, a game you can buy on modern hardware and play, and that's what makes this release more interesting than another remaster normally would be, because Konami isn't rescuing an unsuccessful game nobody remembers, it's separating one of the biggest games from 2008 from the hardware that defined it. For nearly 2 decades, Metal Gear Solid 4 and the PlayStation 3 were almost inseparable. Now a new generation is going to experience Old Snake without ever owning a machine he spent 18 years trapped inside.
That's how you do it.
Metal Gear Solid 4 was never lost. If you were determined enough, you could always find a way to play it, but preservation shouldn't require determination. During the 18 years Metal Gear Solid 4 spent on the PlayStation 3, an entire console generation came and went. Metal Gear disappeared, Metal Gear returned, Snake Eater was completely rebuilt, and somehow the oldest version of Old Snake remains exactly where we had left him in 2008. That's why Master Collection Volume 2 matters, not because the world desperately needed another remaster, but because an important piece of gaming history is finally becoming easy to access again. New players won't need an old console, returning players won't need to dig one out of a cupboard, and the ending of Solid Snake's story will no longer be the one missing chapter in the series that's finally easy to play again. Metal Gear has spent years escaping its old hardware, now there's only one prisoner left. It took 18 years, but Old Snake is finally escaping the PlayStation 3. Before I go, a special thanks goes to the channel members for continuing to support Parasign. It genuinely helps me keep making these videos about old games. If you've enjoyed this one, drop a like and let me know in the comments. Does Metal Gear Solid 4 still hold up for you? And did you ever think we'd see it escape the PlayStation 3? Subscribe to Parasign for more gaming retrospectives, documentaries, and whatever strange corner of gaming history catches my attention next. And if you're into movies and TV, I've also launched Parascreen, where I'm doing the same kind of deep dives into films and television. Resident Evil and Insidious are already up, with Creepshow, Terminator and Robocop on the way. There's a link below. Anyway, 18 years later, Metal Gear Solid 4 is still stuck on the PlayStation 3. Old Snake is still waiting, but he's finally about to be free. I'll see you on the next one.
Kept you waiting, huh?